Hello. So this video lecture will very briefly just finish up the introductory foundational information on Romanticism, Gothic fiction, and Poe before you read the story. Um, this actually sort of worked out well. The last video, the first part, covered a lot of material. This is focused specifically on Poe and what we know about his writing and what influenced him. So something to think about with how dark, gothic, horrific, uh, innovative his writing was. It's important to note that his life was full of tragedy, and we will talk a lot about the psychology of creative writing, the psychology of the writer as we move through this class. Um, so something to think about when it comes to why he wrote what he wrote is that his entire life was surrounded by death. His mother died when he was young. His father had died even before that. Um, I think I'm not sure. I believe his father died in the Civil War actually, or no, in the War of 1812 or something like that. So he was raised by his mother, and then when his mother died, he was sent off to live with an uncle. He was sent off to West Point, failed out. He fell in love. I mean, this is going to be very taboo now, but he fell in love with his 13-year-old cousin when he was an adult and married her. And they had a few good years together, and then she died. So he became obsessed with death. He became obsessed with what he perceived as the beauty in death. Same thing with madness. There's a lot of debate over his mental state through much of his life, and there's a lot of debate over his if he was an alcoholic or not. We don't really know. We do know that he experimented with and abused laudanum for a few periods. Laudanum is I'm not a chemist, but it is fairly similar to morphine. I'm not sure if it's a derivative of morphine or if it's just chemically similar to morphine. We do know he abused that for periods of his life. So Poe actually had a very, very difficult and tragic life, and he became absolutely obsessed with death and madness, and the beauty within death and madness as an art form. He thought these were death and madness were aesthetically significant. But then as his work progressed, there's a certain theme that develops, which is that Poe thought and often wrote about and focused much of his career on one idea, which is that there's nothing more beautiful in the universe than the death of a beautiful woman. So we see a lot of this in his work. Also of importance is that he was a literary critic and scholar. He focused on literature in general, but he was also the first American literary critic and scholar of the short story. So much of what he wrote and much of how he criticized, analyzed, and reviewed and studied short fiction has contributed to what we think of short fiction nowadays. Unfortunately, he died poor and under strange circumstances as a failure. Really, he tried to start several literary magazines, which all tanked. His work at the time was not respected. He sort of sold himself out. He wrote a lot of stuff just to sell it to make money to live. So it wasn't until later, and until later after his death, that he truly gained the respect that he deserved. Also, interestingly, he also sort of with him this archetype of the alienated artist, of the tortured artist, was born with him. A writer outside his society who reflected the derangement of a hypocritical country. Poe became relatively for how limited his work was. Although he was a popular writer, it was still fairly limited in scope. He was known for being this sort of tortured soul, this tortured artist. Um, and that's an archetype that we still see in culture very often today. So knowing these things should provide some of the foundation that will really help you truly understand the importance and the depth of the stories you're about to read next.